What's up, everyone? Kevin Allen here, aka the Geek from DFS Army, and today we're doing a tutorial on how to use the Domination Station Optimizer MLB system. One of the great things about the Domination Station is it's incredibly customizable, allows you, the user, to really create lineups that look like tournament-winning lineups, that replicate what they look like. And we're going to show you how to do that here today. But we're going to start with all of the basics first. I want to kind of make this a complete tutorial, how to use the Dom Station. So as you open up the MLB Optimizer, the first thing you see are these game tiles, and they will show you the implied run totals for each team, which are really important. You want to target teams with high implied run totals or pitchers against teams with low implied run totals. Those two things go hand in hand. If you look here, you see a check mark that implies that the lineup for these particular teams is confirmed. So as you're making lineups, just make note of any teams that don't have confirmed lineups and be careful with those. Might have to swap in players later. So be careful with teams that haven't confirmed their lineups yet. Another thing you could do here is just remove all the players from a game from your optimizer. This will send all the players from this first game to the excluded if I click here, and then if I click again, it will bring them back. Similarly, I can click on any team and pull all of the players from that team out of the player pool. Now, taking a look at the optimization settings, we see the same basic settings we see for most sports. Not all of these are relevant for MLB. Salary range, pretty much irrelevant. Fantasy points range allows you to filter out any players with super low projections. You can use that if you like, but it's not really necessary. Salary cap, this is, again, not something I really care too much about in MLB, but it allows you to set a min-max on your salary cap. Total projected ownership caps, again, not really an MLB function that I personally use, but it allows you to set a total percent ownership projection cap for every lineup that you generate. Again, not something I'm going to use. Right here, we've got the number of lineups, and we're going to set this to 25 for the purpose of this. Actually, let's go 20 for the purpose of this demo. I want it to kind of run quickly, but I want to also be able to show you how to make multiple lineups here. Basic functionality on the right-hand side here, optimal mode versus tournament mode. You can toggle back and forth. You can generally, again, not a super important feature for MLB, but tournament mode does do a little bit of math to spread out exposure to the highest value players, assuming that you set a max exposure limit on those players. So it does a good job of sort of spreading around exposure across the highest projected value players that you have on a particular slate. Again, not something that is critical or even particularly important to use in MLB. This toggle right here sets the number of uniques. So I could set this at 3 unique players, 4 unique, or 5 uniques per lineup, and this will spread out player exposures a little more aggressively. Normally, I would use 3 uniques to mass enter for MLB. MLB is a high variance sport, so I would generally be using about 3 uniques. And right here, you can toggle from browser or server mode. Server mode optimization tends to be a little bit quicker. We use a more powerful server. The browser mode uses your browser and the power of your browser to create the optimization. Server mode sends it to a powerful server to do the optimization, and the idea being that the powerful server is more powerful than your browser, and it will calculate the numbers quicker. That does come up as a thing in MLB, so be aware. Generally, you're going to want to change this over to server mode. Allow hitters versus opposing pitchers. This is a function that's really, really important for very small slates where it might only be 2 or 3 games, and you might want to allow a player or 2 versus the opposing pitcher. Sometimes in a 2-game slate, you just, especially in DraftKings, you need 2 pitchers. It just eliminates too many potential batters. So this allows you to allow that. And again, this is something I would only use on a really small slate, like a 3-gamer or less. Even at 4 games, I'm already good with not allowing batters against my pitcher. This toggle allows you to uncheck any sort of players that are basically allows you to only use confirmed players if you like. So if you say yes, then you would just use confirmed players. Okay, I don't really use that, but again, I'd rather just uncheck a team if I felt uncomfortable with what their starting lineup might be, or uncheck some individual players I wasn't sure about. rather than using this because it will just eliminate too many players more often than not. Right here is a toggle that allows you to remove batters that are hitting in certain position groups. And we'll do this in the context of stacks as well. But let's say I don't want any batters that are batting 9th or 8th today. I can just toggle them off right here using these toggles. Force at least one. So this toggle right here, force at least one player of any position under X number projected ownership. So this is another feature we have that will allow, it's designed to allow or force some low ownership plays into your lineups for tournament purposes. So you might say here on DraftKings, for example, force at least one pitcher. So we can eliminate all these others and just say at least one pitcher under, 10% owned or something like that. And make sure that you'll have at least one of your pitchers that are low owned if you're trying to win a tournament. Not something you need to use, not something I personally tend to use, but it's there and available to you if you want to use it. This is a really important toggle as well. Prioritize completing lineups above min-max exposure settings. So let's say you're one of these people that loves to set a ton of min-max on every single player and every pitcher, and you go crazy with it. And then you're wondering why the optimizer won't make lineups for you. I'll show you what I mean. So if I just set every player to 20% min, I'm going to get exposures, or I'm used to a different optimizer type that allows you to do stuff like this, and I'll just kind of try to figure it out. Well, if I try to optimize this, and I'm trying to get, it actually worked. No, it's just going to ignore. So I have prioritized lineups in there, and it's just going to ignore my crazy settings for the most part and do what it can. It'll do the best it can given the crazy settings that we've put in here, right? If I take this off, then it should just freeze up. Yeah, it's not going to work because we're asking the optimizer to do something that's just impossible to do, which is get 20% exposure to every single player on the slate and no more than 30%. And this is how a lot of people do it. So what we built in was this prioritize completing, so that when you put kind of impossible things into, inputs in there, it will just ignore your crazy inputs and do the right thing, so to speak. Now, pitcher randomization. So you can set randomization for your hitters or your pitcher separately. And the way randomization works, so I set hitter randomization here to 20%. What that means is for every batter, the optimizer will apply a 20% plus or minus randomization factor to their projection for every lineup built. So this will just kind of embrace the fact that MLB is a high variance sport, and it's going to sort of mix up your players a little bit better than if you weren't using randomization. You can, quite honestly, this can go as high as 30-40% for hitters in MLB, and it's no issue at all. 25% is a pretty standard number for that. Pitcher randomization, you can choose to use this or not. Again, similar concept. It will apply. If I set this to 10% and there's a pitcher slated for 10 fantasy points, they will be assigned a random value between 9 and 11 for every lineup generated in terms of what that pitcher's projection will be. Okay. Continuing on to, actually, we'll take a quick look at the player pool before we get to the most important part, stacking, and we're going through it all. So right here in the player pool, you can see that you can sort these by position group. So I've got pitcher here, and I can go through my pitchers. Right here within the player pool, you can, if I like Jacob deGrom and I want to give him a 5% projection bump, I can click on the thumbs up. It says it right here, 10% projection bump for a Love, 15% projection bump for an Adore. That's what the button right here does. If you click negative, you'll get a negative 5% projection bump. Again, minus 10%. And minus 15%, you see it's written here, so you can understand exactly what you're doing. There's no mystery there. Minus 15% on the projection. So if I don't want too much deGrom, I can just adjust his projection that way, or I can just go over here and type in whatever projection I want for Jacob deGrom. Right here, if I want to lock this player into all my lineups, I just click the lock button. One more function here in the player pool. Number one, I can uncheck a player, which will just exclude them from eligibility. And then right here, chain to stacking, which means, and this is not for really for pitchers, but more for batters. If I only want to allow this hitter in my Mets stacks, I don't want Pete Alonso just floating around as a one-off. I just want him in my Mets stacks. I can use this chain to stacking, and these player, if I chain a player, then he will only be allowed to be used in stacks set up for his team. Now, with that being said, let me show you how to create stacks. This is the gold standard of MLB optimization. Now, the idea of MLB in general is build correlated lineups. We've learned this over the years. What wins tournaments for MLB? It's when you stack teams. And generally, you need to stack 2 teams, right? So if you catch the team that scores 15 runs that day and you have 5 hitters from that team, or 4 or 3, you're probably having a good start. Now, if you can catch the 2 teams on a given slate that score 10 plus runs, and you get stacks from each of those 2 teams, all of the players from those teams are probably benefiting. And that's how you win tournaments. Now, the idea of which team is going to pop off, or knowing which team is going to pop off for 10, 12, or 15 runs in any particular game, you're probably not going to be able to do that. It's not something that is super predictable. I mean, we can have leans and, bad pitcher and this guy's getting crushed and whatever. That's what the analysis is for. But in the end of the day, the idea is just to combine 2 teams that put up a lot of runs, get the hitters from both of those teams into your lineup. And when a team puts up 15 runs, what happens? Number one, the batters get like 6, 7 at bats even. Everybody's hitting. Somebody's being walked. Somebody's being RBIs are happening and all this stuff. So correlated lineups is what you want to do. So if you're ever going to attack a tournament in MLB, I'm going to show you how to do it. But most importantly, if you're going to do it, you damn well better stack your lineups, or you're going to lose all your money. So here you can select what type of stack combination you want. The most common, so I'm looking at DraftKings here. The most common stack is probably 5-2. 4-4 is interesting. So you could set these however you want. 5-2 will give you 5 players from one team, 2 players from the second team, and then a one-off floater. You do 4-4, which will get you 4 and 4 and still have the floater. 5-3 pretty much stacks the entire lineup usually. I haven't seen as much of that winning. There almost always needs to be a floater. So 4-3 is also an acceptable stack type. So you as the user would set what you want. And let's do 50% 4-3 and 50% 5-2. Now, this is a forced min. So you do need to fill out the full 100% of this, or those other lineups will just randomly choose one of these stack combinations. And most often it's going to choose the least restrictive one. So probably 5x or 4x or something like that. So here I'm choosing 50% 5-2 stacks, 50% 4-3 stacks. Let's see how that goes. Now, stack 1 and stack 2. Stack 1 will always be this first number. Stack 2 will always be the second number. So stack 1 is designed to potentially be more players, and stack 2. So as a user, you have a few different options here. Number 1, I can uncheck teams that I don't want to use. I can set a forced universal max limit on any team. So I could just say, hey, I don't want more than 30% exposure to any one team for stack 1. I could do the same for stack 2. By the way, if I set 30% on stack 1 and 30% on stack 2, the highest value lineup might wind up in 30% of my stack 1s, and then 30% of my stack 2. I can still get 60% of that team. So this is per stack. Now, the other thing we can do here is set how much forced exposure I want to any particular stack. Some people might just go, hey, I want every team. We set a 10%, and it's going to go 10% on every single one, except you cannot cross 100% forced exposure in a stack. Unfortunately, 100% is the most that is possible. So as you can see here, 10% forced min on every team does not work. You can maybe do 5% and get only 60 on this particular slate. That'll give you 60%. And keeping in mind, the ideal situation is to fill this out to 95 or 100%, but you cannot go over 100%. So showing you this right here, if I wanted to get a little more exposure to the White Sox, for example, I can put 20%. We're up to 75. Add another 10% here. We're up to 80. Add another 10% there. We're up to 90. Go right there. We hit 100. That's it. We have to stop right there on stack 1. Stack 2, again, we could just leave these. You don't have to set forced mins. It will just go based on projections, or you can choose the teams. Again, one of the great things about the Domination Stage Optimizer is you, the user, have all the power as long as you understand how to use this. So with stack 2, you might just let it float. You might want to do some forced mins, however you want to do it. The more we tell it what we want, generally the faster the optimization will run. One other thing to keep in mind, if I don't want to use certain players in these stacks based on batting order, like I don't use 9 place hitters, so I just pull them out. If you uncheck this, it will pull out. It won't allow any 9th place hitters in these stacks. Go pull out the 8s as well if we want. It's going to eliminate some of the cheapies, though. Let's see if this runs. From there, I think we've done enough. Let's run an optimization. 20 lineups created. Now I'm going to show you what some of the awesome features are here, again, for additional control, because there's a lot going on here. So we've now run 20 lineups. We just clicked optimize. Here are 20 lineups that we used, 68 players used. Okay. So from here, we could see the player exposures that we got. And of course, we loaded up on Jacob deGrom at pitcher. You can sort by pitcher. You can see what we did here. So let's say right off the bat, oh, I don't want that much deGrom. I can set a max limit on him wherever we want. I can set max limits on these pitchers however we want, right? Oh, Aaron Nola, that's too much. Fine. Set it to 45 and 60% max. We could do similar things across each position group here in the exposure box, but here's where it gets really, really cool. This tab will show you which teams we used in general. So this is where we can set a max limit on any particular team. So in this case, we got 55% exposure to the White Sox in various stacks. And in a second, it'll show us where, but it just shows us the total team exposure across these teams. If we want less, we can set a max limit right here. So I can set, oh, that's too much White Sox. I don't want 55%. I only want 35%. I could set a max exposure for any particular team right here. Max. All right. So the next tab shows us which teams were used in relation to particular stacks. So in this case, we've got 20% White Sox exposures in stack 1. Looks like 30% White Sox exposure in stack 2. So if we want to change that up, we can actually set max limits per stack right here in this box as well. So let's say, oh, that's too much White Sox. And again, I'm getting crazy because I already limited them in a different thing. But if I thought a team exposure was too high, I can lower it here, or we can, of course, just lower it here. It's the same effectual screen, but just showing down here. And this is one of my favorites. This is actually probably my favorite tab of them all, the combinations tab. So earlier, I mentioned that the way you win in MLB DFS is accidentally falling on the 2 correct teams, stacking up their hitters against one another and hoping that you get the right combination, right? But the first key to it is finding those 2. And of course, we got to hit the right pitchers and there's other things. But the key part for me is understanding that the more we mix up our combinations, the better our chances of accidentally hitting the right combination. So we got to catch the 2 teams that scored 12 plus runs that day. And if it's White Sox, Philly, in every combination or it's a heavy them, if it's this 30, 40%, we have limits here that are not showing how crazy it can get. But if it gets too much on one combo, we can limit it. So I could say, you know what? I don't want more than 15% of my lineups to be White Sox, Philly. And it will spread it out more and more. The other way to get additional spread is just increasing the number of uniques per lineup, which will spread things out a little bit more as well. So that pretty much covers how to use the Domination Station Optimizer to attack MLB. I'm going to tell you, I would suggest not using legacy controlled hitter stacks. This is quite honestly, an old system that we had before we put a much, much better stacking mode in place. And some people still wanted it because they were used to doing things. By the time the season starts, I might just pull that option and see if anyone complains. We'll see. Player combination rules, not really something that's super relevant for MLB as well. So that's about it. You're going to stack your lineups. Choose a stack type. One of the great things we do in DFS Army is we actually analyze which stack types are winning, have one, and we have a full sheet that describes which of these combinations work most frequently for FanDuel and DraftKings. So all of that information will be provided to you. We've also got a team of coaches that are recommending particular teams to go heavier on stacks on any particular day or lighter on, and which pitchers to use. So all of those things will be recommended to you. So again, give it another run. We ran it before. We made some adjustments. We give it another run here. We got another 20 lineups going. Can see that, hey, we limited the White Sox, and Toronto's popping a little bit more. We can go through each of these tabs to make sure that we're getting a really nice spread the way we want. Once you're comfortable with the lineups, we're going to go right here, download our lineups. Boom, save it. And from there, you can upload directly to DraftKings, or more importantly, you would have reserved your lineups already on DraftKings, and you would just be editing in the proper lineups. It's really important to do your final run for MLB as close as possible to lock. I tried to wait within literally minutes of lock. Of course, we put in don't just put it in the first time. You want to do an edit about 15 minutes before lineups lock, and then a second edit as close as, but even seconds to spare. Because the more data we have, the more confirmed lineups we can get by the time it locks, the better it's going to be for our overall run. The fewer players that are out wind up in our lineups that we have to then pull later. So make sure you're doing your final edit as close as possible to lock. But I'm saying final for a very important reason, because you want to do a prior edit at least 15 minutes before lock, so you don't, have your computer turn off, a power outage, something, freeze, you have to reset the computer. You do not want to leave things for the last second. So you always need an early edit and then a final edit really close to lock. That should do it for this breakdown. I don't think I forgot anything, but of course, if you are a DFS Army subscriber and you have any questions, we have an entire staff ready to answer them and show you what to do. So good luck this season. We hope you crush it in MLB. We know we're going to be all over the top of those leaderboards, and we hope that you take down some tourneys this year.